This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson.
Yes, welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. This is your host, Harry Wilkinson, and this is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks events, happenings in the world of politics, healthcare, international news, and we take a look at it from a higher perspective. And when we look at these stories, situations from a higher perspective, it's a way of taking a step back and recognizing the truth of who and what we are and how we are creating these stories, these situations, these this world around us in fascinating and unprecedented ways. And it's all part of what we came here to do. It's all part of what our mission is here in playing this earthly game that we play every day. So from a metaphysical standpoint, which is really what I'm talking about here, from a metaphysical standpoint, we exist at our highest level as oneness. And fascinatingly enough, as science continues to explore things such as dark matter and quantum physics, more and more it's realized how much we are one and how much we are creating everything around us. So in thinking this way, it's not just airy-fairy, new agey kind of wishful thinking. It's truth. It's truth that's been talked about for centuries from mystics and poets. And now science is backing it up in so many ways. It's fascinating. We've talked about that quite a bit on this show. I'm sure we'll come back around to doing it again. But this week's show is going to focus on, what hopefully will be a little bit of a lighter topic, because it is Father's Day, and it is a time when we honor our parenting skills as well as our parents, or we get honored by our children for our parenting skills. So I wanted to talk about that in relation to the transition era, which, if you're new to the show and you haven't listened before, what I call the transition era is this time we're living in now, where rapid change is occurring. Much of it is under the surface, but a lot of it you can see in all areas. But most importantly, and why the changes are happening, is because we are changing in our awareness and our consciousness. So the transition era has planted the seeds for much social change, which we see in everything from the activities of Black Lives Matter to the gay marriage movement in this country, and the focus on income inequality, all of these things that for years hadn't been talked about, or talked about in minor ways. Now there's major focus on them, and of course changes in those things aren't very quick. They take time. And the basic tenor of this transition era, as I've mentioned before, is sort of a few steps forward, a few steps back kind of thing, where progress is made and then fear kicks in and things get pulled back. And that's kind of what we've been going through for the past couple of years. But the seeds have been planted, and this process of push and pull is really a refining process, making sure that these changes are changes that are for the best, number one, and will last. And we sensed it. I think we sense on a of course, just an intuitive level that the world is changing in such dramatic fashion, and not just the outer circumstances of it, but our interactions with each other. So that affects everything we do, and parenting is one of those things that it affects. So, what could possibly be new about parenting in this era as opposed to other eras? Well, quite a bit, as a matter of fact. I remember my dad when he was alive. He went to work every day. Typical thing. Put on the suit and tie. Grabbed his breakfast, went off to work in the morning, came home, 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. And that was life. And on the weekends, we did hobbies, sometimes took trips to see grandparents, that kind of thing. And the parenting that I got from my dad was let me just say it was more about allowing my growth as a person. It was more about my maturing, and I was left sort of on my own to do that. And of course, I had support and help as far as handling things, in school, or making sure I had clothes on my back, enough to eat, all that kind of thing. But in many other ways, I was left to my own devices to such a degree. Now, that may also have been because I was the youngest, and my parents had 3 children before me, and I think they were kind of exhausted, quite frankly. But I think they had also learned that kids are going to grow and they're going to be okay. And you don't have to worry so much and stress yourself out so much. There's so many hours in the day that you can do that. And over worrying often just doesn't do anything except to stress you out. So, and that was my parents' generation. And I think that generation of parenting, and that style of parenting is very different from what is emerging today. I'd say somewhere in the 80s, maybe late 80s, early 90s, a new approach to parenting, or a more hands-on approach, I guess, to parenting began to arise, and there were a couple of reasons for that. Number one, there have been a lot more research on how children grow and develop. And ideas like, playing Mozart for your unborn child, or for babies, helping their brain development, things of that nature, began to, surface. And another reason was that, we began to hear more and more about, children in peril, whether it be, kidnappings, or, bullying, or, what have you. And that's an interesting point. There's been a lot of focus on, bullying in schools, and a lot of that has to do probably also with the fact that because of the technological tools that we have, bullying can, extend into, the home and the child's life. So there's been a lot of focus on bullying. When I was growing up, the standard idea of bullies was that if you stood up to the bully, they, eventually back down. And you either stood up to them or just ignored them entirely. I think that pretty much was what my dad said. Just ignore them, and they'll go away. They won't see any fun in bothering you anymore. But if you engage with them, then they will continue to bully you. And if you show that the bullying is bothering you, then they get off on that and will continue to do it. And I think that was pretty much the wisdom of my parents' generation. But now we've got all kinds of laws on the books and rules about bullying, and we have situations where children or young teenagers have committed suicide, and that's been attributed to bullying. So there's much more focus on that now, and it's all part of this kind of what is the phrase they use? Helicopter parenting. And for those who don't know what that is, helicopter parenting is a situation or a form of parenting where there's extremely close attention paid to the children's experiences, their problems, their school, and parents are, we call it helicopter parenting because they are certainly hovering over and overseeing every aspect of the child's life. Whereas my parents, other than taking care of the basic things, and if I really had a problem, I could go and talk to them. But other than that, they let me go and live and have my experiences. So, and that term I'm looking at now because I'm trying to remember when we first started. 1990 was when that term was coined, and they even tell us here who coined this term: Foster Cline and Jim Fay. And I don't know where, maybe perhaps a book they wrote. So, in any case, helicopter parenting began to, really gain notoriety or traction in the 1990s, and then in the 2000s, as our millennials now started going to college, that became something that became a term that college administrators and high school administrators took seriously. Situations where every aspect of the child's schooling, including interactions with their professors in college and teachers, and complaining about the grades that their children had received, all of those things became part of the parenting style. And it's attributed to baby boomer parents of millennial children. Gen X parents now, okay, this is interesting. Okay, yeah. So, generational demographer Neil Howe describes baby boomer parents as being the helicopter parent generation. And Gen Xers, he calls stealth fighter parents, because Gen Xers tend to let minor issues go. But if serious issues arise, they take care of them, very vigorously. Now, it's interesting that, there are benefits and liabilities to the helicopter approach. There can be certainly an overbearingness about it, as helicopter parents try to make sure that their children are on the path to success. But it can also be very good. I mean, it's a it can bring a closeness in the relationships, and I can say that though I felt close with my parent, I didn't feel like, I guess I felt like maybe I needed more guidance from them than I got. But that was just how they were, and that was just how that generation was. So, and this all happened because of two things, our society changed, and there were, at a certain time in the 90s, of course, there was, greater wealth and a booming economy, but also a need and an understanding that they wanted for children, that you had to have a certain path to success to live the kind of lifestyle that had been set up. And because jobs that paid well, and we're in this situation now, where it became, and increasingly it still is becoming, harder to make a living from jobs that are blue collar jobs. If you worked in a factory, many of those jobs are disappearing and going away. But back in, say, the 80s and 70s, and right up probably into about the early 90s, you could make a good living as a truck driver, mechanic, or working, in a factory. But those jobs had stagnant wages, and so now, if you want to have your child live a successful life and be able to afford all of the things that they would like to have in their lives, well, perhaps a little extra attention is necessary to get them to where they need to be. And as I mentioned, there was also a sense of children being endangered, which is a bit paranoid, but came out of greater access to news stories about these sorts of things. So there's that's kind of how that change came, and now we're dealing with, since we are in this transition era, we're dealing with another shift in society now, because of some of the things that I mentioned. In the transition era, as our economy is completely changing, we're moving from an economy that is focused on acquiring things to an economy that is, what they call the sharing economy. And new values, really, that are actually, in an interesting way, it's almost a return to some of the values that my parents had. But I'll talk about that in a minute. So we had the helicopter parenting. Then we had, for a while, there was something about the Tiger Mom. There was a book called Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. And it exhibited the style of Chinese parenting, which was described as extreme parenting, where tiger mothers are focused on success in precision-oriented fields, like math and music. And while helicopter parents are obsessed with preventing failure at all costs. And the tiger mother emphasized hard work and an extreme, rigid, and authoritarian approach toward their children. Whereas helicopter parents in the Western society tend to worship their children in a way and crave their friendship. So, there's a lot of, as I say, a lot of good points, bad points about the helicopter parenting. But what are the parenting? And the Japanese equivalent of that, by the way, is something called monster parents, who are constantly complaining and demanding, special attention for their children, so that came out of Hong Kong, as a matter of fact. And it was it was a phrase they used to describe a phenomena where indulgence leads to children's bad behavior, and these monster parents step in and protect them and don't correct that bad behavior. And the concept also was that it had effects on children that made them self-centered, that made them arrogant, that where they would blame everybody else instead of trying to improve themselves, and just ask for their parents to bail them out of just about everything. It's also another term for that is cosseting children by interfering with their personal life in every way. And, while of course it's a natural instinct to want to take care of your kid and make sure that they have a happy life, overdoing it in these ways can be more of a hindrance than a help. But so what about parenting now? Well, here we are in this transition era. Now the millennials are having children and beginning to raise their children. So, what is their style? And as I say, we have another shift in society now. That's in this transition era where we have as I said, the sharing economy, and we have a focus on making the best use of our resources. We're very aware of energy and forms of energy and the environment. So we have a generation that, for instance, maybe doesn't even own a car, but uses services like Uber, or if they own a home, they might rent it out or swap with others. So it's a different kind of society that we're living in. There's an article in USA Today about young millennial parents. And they give us some census data here, which is interesting. There's, first of all, in this generation, there's less young people having children. In this 18 to 34 age group, about 46, less than half of the total women in that age group have given birth. Whereas, these are, 18 to 34 are considered the prime childbearing years. And it's very common for people in this age group, particularly women, to either not be married, maybe they have a live-in boyfriend or something, and to not have had children. So that's also an interesting change. Now, one other theme that seems to come across in this article, and some of the research that was done on these millennial moms, they apparently have what they quote here as a predisposition towards alternative sources of information, which suggests that this might be the generation that goes around what they call the mommy wars, the idea that there's one right way to parent. Because of the enormous access of information. I mean, we have, as a parent today, you have access to information at your fingertips that, no generation has really ever had. And you also have a wide variety of choices that are not considered to be any big deal. Whether as a women can stay home or go to work, And there's not just one way to do things, and a variety of different approaches and ways to parent. Um, so there's so many influences that are affecting what parenting is becoming. And technology is certainly one of them. And I think maybe the primary, focus of millennial parents has got to be the fact that we are living in this transition era and things change so fast. And when things change fast, you realize that you might not be able to control everything in your child's life. You just don't know what's going to happen. You just don't know what new things are coming up. And if you just take technology, young people have technology that their parents couldn't even understand or think about, and there's a continuing generational divide on using technology and how to use it. So in trying to prepare your children for the arrival of things that you can't possibly know about, that's a tough task. But as a teacher, and I've seen other teachers who don't really want their students to be, doing a lot of work on the computers, or shy away from teaching computer usage, because they feel that, they feel uncomfortable because they didn't grow up with those things, and the usage of computers when they were growing up was totally different from what it is now. Smartphones, tablets, all of those things are essential parts of life now and will continue to be so. So my thing has always been to, train your children, teach your children, and help them be ready for their future, not your future. Their future is very much tied into all of those things. So they need to have that, and you need to help them in any way that you can. But I digress a little bit. So, this group of parents is probably the most ethnically and racially diverse group that we've had in this country. Because the emphasis, when they were growing up was on getting, college degrees and post-grad. They tend to be highly educated, but also underemployed. In other words, it's very common for the young millennials to have degrees that they can't use. So there's a lot of stressors going on in our changing world. We've seen the economy collapse. And it's just interesting that I think the focus has to be on making their childhoods exciting and fun, and that's about all you can do. They take, according to this report on millennial parents, they take a playful, hands-on approach to parenting. And they remember a simpler time when they were children. And there's also a team family approach. Dads and moms are all working together. So here's one dad who one dad who sees himself as part of a team with his wife, and they discussed how they would divide the labor well before their son was even born. I think that's a great, responsible way to go about doing things. And what else? Oh, sharing tips and responsibilities with partners, peers, and parents. So, I mean, the phrase "it takes a village," very much an important part now, as many children from an early age are spending increasing times in preschools and daycare centers. So there's that situation too. And apparently, now this is really interesting, millennials are far more likely than moms or dads of any other generation to be raising their kids near or even in the same house as their extended family. So many of them have their fathers and mothers and grandparents very nearby out of necessity, because there's a need to have, the family, there as, work responsibilities increase and so on and so forth, which is very interesting, in certainly in Asian countries and in most countries, actually Latin American countries as well. The family, the extended family, plays a much more important role and is always there. So, it's just interesting that there's a return to simplicity, and there's a, it takes a village kind of approach that I think is terrific. I really think that the time for those helicopter approaches and the tiger mom approaches has passed, thanks to the transition era. And that we, as a society, in raising our children, need to emphasize, togetherness, connections with the family. Because as I've mentioned before on the show, research has shown that happiness is very directly connected to our sense of connection. So until next week,